There are cities on this planet that were swallowed by the ocean so fast, so completely, that they are still sitting on the seafloor with dinner plates on the tables and coins in the drawers. One of them sank in 2 minutes. Port Royal, Jamaica, just after 11 in the morning on June the 7th, 1692. The harbour smells of rum and gunpowder and salt. The docks are loud with sailors shouting across the wharves, and the taverns are already spilling drunks into the road. Warships and pirate sloops sit packed 3 deep against the quay. This is the richest and most violent port in the New World, a town so drenched in gambling and murder that visiting clergymen call it the wickedest city on earth. At 11:43, the ground stops behaving like ground. The sand Port Royal is built on, a thin tongue of loose sediment jutting into the bay, turns to liquid under the force of the earthquake. Buildings do not fall, they sink. 3- and 4-story brick warehouses drop straight down into the earth, as if the soil beneath them has simply decided to stop holding. Streets open. People are swallowed standing up, some pinned at the waist as the sand re-solidifies around them, left to drown when the sea comes in over the top. Within 2 minutes of the main shock, 33 acres of the city, 2/3 of everything that has ever been built there, are gone beneath the harbour. 2,000 people die in that first wave. 3,000 more will die in the weeks that follow. Divers working the site today swim through streets that are still streets, past walls that are still standing, over tables where pewter tankards sit exactly where they were set down that morning. A pocket watch pulled from the ruins had stopped at 11:43. Everything the living were doing when the ground liquefied was preserved in place because there was no warning, no time to run, no chance to save anything. The Puritan ministers in Boston and London wrote that it was the judgment of God on a wicked town. What they did not write, because it did not serve them, was that Port Royal had been flagged as unstable for years. The sand could not hold a city. They built it anyway, and when it collapsed, the explanation that survived was the one that blamed the dead. The second city did not sink in 2 minutes. It took 300 years, and the people who owned it kept coming back to watch. On the Bay of Naples, about a dozen miles west of Pompeii, there is a stretch of coast where the ground itself is alive. Beneath it sits the Phlegraean Fields, a supervolcano whose magma chamber exhales and inhales on a geological clock, lifting the land and dropping it again over centuries. The Romans built a city on top of it. They called it Baiae. Baiae was the place emperors went when they wanted to stop being watched. 7 of them built villas here: Augustus, Nero, Hadrian, Claudius, Caligula, a list that reads like the roster of Roman power at its most absolute. Julius Caesar kept a house here. Mark Antony kept a house here. The poet Seneca called it a resort of vice, and the scholar Varro wrote that in Baiae, old men behaved like young boys. This was the private playground of the most powerful men on earth, a town of marble pools fed by volcanic springs, mosaic floors, and banquets that lasted for days inside villas the size of small towns. In one of those villas, in 65 AD, a senator named Piso gathered a group of conspirators and plotted to murder Nero. The villa still sits where it was built, 18 feet underwater, its floor plan intact, its marble thresholds still marking the doors the conspirators walked through. And that is the strangest thing about Baiae. The city did not die in a catastrophe. The ground simply began to drop, slowly, over generations, as the magma beneath the Phlegraean Fields shifted and released. The wealthy abandoned their villas one floor at a time as the Mediterranean climbed the marble steps. By the 8th century, the lower half of Baiae was gone. Today, divers swim through colonnaded streets in 15 feet of water, past statues still standing in the alcoves where Romans placed them, mosaics of fish and gods intact on the floors of dining rooms, fish ponds the emperors once stocked for their banquets. The whole sunken city is now an underwater archaeological park, and the fish that swim through Nero's pleasure gardens are the only occupants left. Now consider a city that sat on the seafloor for 1,200 years without anyone knowing it existed. About 20 miles northeast of Alexandria, in the Bay of Naples, The Mediterranean is shallow and flat and gives nothing away. Fishermen have worked this water for centuries, ships have crossed it for millennia, and the entire time, 6 kilometers out from the shore and 10 meters beneath the surface, an entire Egyptian port city was sitting in the silt. Its name was Thonis. The Greeks called it Heracleion. Before Alexandria existed, this was the only door into Egypt, the mandatory port of entry for every Greek ship arriving on the Nile Delta, a metropolis twice the size of Pompeii, crisscrossed by canals, and dedicated to Amun, the supreme god of Egypt. Herodotus wrote about it in the 5th century BC, describing a temple where the Greek hero Heracles had first set foot on Egyptian soil and claiming that Helen of Troy had visited with Paris before the Trojan War began. For 1,000 years after the city disappeared, that passage in Herodotus was the only proof Heracleion had ever existed. Historians assumed he was exaggerating. A city that big, that important, leaving no trace, was a story, not a place. Then, in the year 2000, an underwater archaeologist named Frank Goddio, who had been searching the bay for 4 years, saw something huge take shape through the murk. It was a face. The face belonged to a red granite statue of a pharaoh, 5.4 meters tall, lying on its side in the sand where it had fallen. Beside it lay another statue of his queen. Beside that, a third, of Hapi, the god of the Nile flood, weighing 5.5 tons. What Goddio's team mapped in the years that followed was not a ruin. It was a preserved city. 64 ancient ships sat on the seafloor where they had been moored, 700 stone anchors lay in the silt, and the temple of Amun still had columns standing upright inside it. Gold jewelry, silver ritual instruments, and alabaster jars for perfumes sat where their owners had last set them down in the 4th century BC. The cause was the Nile Delta itself. The ground under Heracleion was soft sediment, and a series of earthquakes and tsunamis in the 2nd century BC liquefied it. The city did not collapse. It sank into its own foundations, and the sea came in over the top. For 1,200 years, every map of ancient Egypt was missing a city the size of 2 Pompeiis. Nobody looked because nobody believed it was there. The 4th city was not discovered. It was dismissed for 3,000 years as a story. Off the western coast of Gujarat in the Arabian Sea, the waters of the Gulf of Cambay are muddy and fast-moving and have always been hostile to divers. Beneath them, at a depth of 120 feet, sit the remains of a city that Hindu scripture has been describing for most of recorded history. Its name is Dwarka. According to the Mahabharata, it was the capital of Lord Krishna, a fortified metropolis on the western edge of the Indian subcontinent, and when Krishna left the mortal world, the sea rose and took it. For 3 millennia, priests told this story. Pilgrims prayed at the site on the shore, and Western historians catalogued it as religious myth. Then, in 1983, the National Institute of Oceanography sent marine archaeologists into the Arabian Sea to investigate anomalies in the seabed. What they found was not mythology. They found stone walls, grid street patterns, fortified foundations, pillars standing in rows on the ocean floor, and stone anchors of the type used by the ships of a major ancient port. A submerged city, laid out with the precision of a planned capital, sitting under the water in the exact place the Mahabharata said it would be. The glitch is the age. Carbon dating on wood and construction material recovered from the site returned a number that broke every timeline mainstream archaeology has built. They were 9,500 years old, 4,000 years older than the pyramids, 2,000 years older than the Sumerian civilization, long considered the oldest in the world, older than writing itself, older than agriculture as a widespread practice. A sophisticated, planned, fortified urban centre sitting on the seafloor off the Indian coast, built at a time when the accepted story says humanity was still figuring out how to farm. The Archaeological Survey of India has confirmed the find. The carbon dates have been published. And mainstream history has done with Dwarka what mainstream history does when evidence arrives early, which is refused to integrate it. The textbooks still begin civilization at Sumer around 4000 BC. The sunken city off Gujarat does not appear in them. Krishna's kingdom was supposed to be a fable. It turns out the fable was older than every empire we were told came first. The fifth and final city is the oldest. It is also the quietest. Off the Carmel coast of Israel, about 400 meters from the shore near the modern town of Atlit, the Mediterranean is clear and calm and unusually shallow. Swimmers can see the bottom. What they do not always see, sitting under 30 feet of water, are the foundations of a village that has been there for 9,000 years. Its name is Atlit Yam. It was found in 1984 by a marine archaeologist named Ehud Galili, who was surveying the seafloor for shipwrecks and noticed that the shapes in the sand were not ships. They were houses, rectangular stone dwellings with paved floors and long straight walls, built around a freshwater well that is the oldest stone-lined well ever found. And at the center of the settlement, arranged in a semicircle around a natural spring, stood 7 megaliths, each weighing 600 kilograms, a stone circle 9,000 years old, older than Stonehenge by 4,000 years. Atlit Yam is not impressive because it is ancient. It is impressive because it is perfect. The sand preserved everything. Archaeologists have recovered 90 human skeletons, some buried in flexed position inside the houses themselves, some laid in stone-lined graves outside, alongside bonefish hooks, basketry, wooden tools, and piles of fish that were cleaned and stacked and waiting to be traded on the morning the village was abandoned. The people of Atlit Yam did not leave slowly. They left in a hurry. 2 of the skeletons, a woman and her infant child, carry the earliest confirmed cases of tuberculosis in human history. The disease passed from mother to baby at birth 9,000 years ago, and the bones that hold the evidence are still lying where the villagers buried them. What drove Atlit Yam into the sea is still argued. Some researchers point to a tsunami from a volcanic collapse on Mount Etna. Others blame sea level rise from melting glaciers at the end of the last ice age. Either way, the village was drowned so fast that a community of hundreds left their food, their tools, and their dead and ran. And the stone circle is still standing down there. 7 megaliths around a freshwater spring on the floor of the Mediterranean, arranged by people whose names we will never know and whose world ended before the pyramids were imagined. 5 cities, each one stranger than the last. So how many more are still down there, waiting to prove that the history we were taught is the wrong one?